Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's amazing that we have so many people here around the world joining us. Reverse the Trend, Save Our People, Save Our Planet is proud to present tonight's event entitled Overcoming the Crises of Climate Change, COVID-19, and Nuclear Challenges on Pacific and First Nations Community. This event is sponsored by the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, Climate Cardinals, Zero Hour NYC, Peace Boat US, Marshallese Educational Initiative, Amplify, Youth Nuclear Peace Summer, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy. And I also would like to acknowledge the generous support from both the Outrider Foundation and Prospect Hill Foundation. Before we begin, I would like to underscore that tonight is the eve of the 51st anniversary of Earth Day here in the US, and it is already Earth Day in the Pacific region. It is timely that we are gathering here virtually on Earth Day, because Earth Day's 2021 theme is on restoring our Earth, the focus on ecosystems. At the heart of this theme is optimism, a critically needed sentiment in a world ravaged by both climate change and the pandemic, as explained by the president of Earth Day. I should also add as well as, by nuclear weapons. The president of earthday.org further states that this year we are supporting local communities in areas that are disproportionately affected by environmental issues. In line with the spirit of Earth Day, we are gathering tonight to hear from experts and youth from First Nations about the twin existential threats facing humanity, nuclear weapons, climate change, as well as additional crises facing their communities. We will also hear from youth activists who are making a difference in the world. At Reverse the Trend, we believe that youth can restore this planet. Thank you all for your attention, and I would like to now give the floor to Sophia Kiani, the founder and executive director of Climate Cardinals, who is also the youngest member of the UN Secretary General's Youth Advisory Group on Climate Change. The floor is yours, Sophia.
Thank you so much, Christian. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be moderating this event today. So as Christian said, I am Sophia Kiani, and I am the founder and executive director of Climate Cardinals. Climate Cardinals is an international youth-led nonprofit, and we work to make climate education more accessible to people who don't speak English. And we do that by translating climate information into over 100 languages through our network of 8,000 volunteers. And so tonight's speakers are, starting off, Dr. Carlos Umana. He is the co-president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. And then we have Benetick, Kabua, Maddison of the Marshallese Educational Initiative. And then we have Kacie McLaren, a young Algonquin who works closely with the Kebaowek First Nation. And then we have Kerrie, Blaise, a lawyer from the Canadian Environmental Law Association who collaborates with First Nations. Devon Parfait, the future chief of the Grand Calliou Dulac band of Biloxi-Chitimacha-Choctaw. And then we have Kendra Pinto, a young Diné woman from the Eastern Agency of the Navajo First Nation. Silvia, Cantu, an SDG youth scholar from Peace Boat US, and Danielle Samler, a researcher and admin officer of the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy and a coordinator of Reverse the Trend. So now I would like to introduce you all to our first speaker, Dr. Carlos Umana, the co-president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. Carlos will touch upon the existential threats facing humanity. The floor is all yours, Carlos.
Thank you very much, Sophia. Thank you all for having me tonight. Now, in this global crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the world has become aware of the importance of following science and evidence in policy making. And there is a greater understanding of where true security actually lies and which countries and systems are more capable of actually protecting their people. This pandemic is a symptom of a disease that ails humanity and that could very well lead to more pandemics once this one is over, if we, as a global community, did not take drastic action. This COVID-19 crisis has exposed many systemic flaws and vulnerabilities, and as serious as its impact has been to our health and to our economies worldwide, it is not an existential threat. And its impact is actually insignificant compared to that of the impending climate crisis and of a nuclear war, whatever its proportions. So climate change and nuclear weapons are the two existential threats to life on Earth. They are intricately linked and mutually reinforcing. With the world's climate being as unpredictable and changing as it currently is, the climate crisis is impossible to ignore. However, most people do ignore how serious the risk of nuclear war is and why nuclear disarmament is more important now than ever. So to solve the climate crisis, we're often told that it is a matter of costs and political will. So let's talk a little bit about the costs. As per the US Environmental Protection Agency, in the US alone, the costs of the damages caused by extreme weather events were $400 billion in 2018. And this cost could easily reach $3 trillion per year by the year 2050. The cost of air pollution from burning fossil fuels is estimated to be about $176 billion per year, or up to $5.2 trillion in total by 2050. Now, nuclear weapons, which are militarily and politically obsolete and suicidal, are extremely expensive to maintain. Current investment in nuclear weapons has been calculated to be as high as $116 billion per year and rising. Moreover, many of the political resources and scientific talent needed for ecological innovation are currently engaged in the development of nuclear weapons and other enterprises that, far from solving our urgent existential problems, rather threaten life on the planet. Now, the climate crisis increases the risk of nuclear war. The doomsday clock is a symbolic clock made by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists that measures the risk of total catastrophic man-made destruction in minutes to midnight, midnight being this destruction. It currently marks 100 seconds to midnight, the greatest risk in history. This is roughly due to three factors: the unstable political leadership in nuclear weapon states, the increased risk of accidental nuclear detonation or cyber terrorism due to the vulnerability of the high alert systems and their increased reliance on automation, and climate change. Climate change multiplies the potential for conflict over resources such as land, drinking water, and food resources, and increases the pressure to migrate. Political collapse, in turn, leads to extremist leaders gaining control over nuclear weapons, and this poses a risk in regions where they are already in political tension. Now, a single nuclear detonation, especially in current times, is capable of causing significant and irreparable environmental damage. On the other hand, even a limited use of nuclear weapons would have catastrophic climate consequences. In a nuclear exchange between India and Pakistan, both nuclear weapon states and often in conflict, with 100 Hiroshima-sized bombs, which is less than half their arsenal and less than 1% of the global arsenal, the catastrophic impact would not only be local and regional, but also global. The climate would be altered in such a way as to reduce harvest times for the staple grains on which many populations depend, leading to a famine that would kill more than 2 billion people worldwide. Now, this food shortage, in turn, would generate more conflicts, which could lead to a greater use of nuclear weapons. And on a larger scale, a nuclear war would cause a destruction of unimaginable proportions, with tens of millions of deaths, with a very high radiation pollution of large areas, and a nuclear winter that would result in the destruction of our civilization and the extinction of many species, possibly even our own. the solution to climate change must include nuclear disarmament. Nuclear weapons represent an unacceptable cost and risk and undermine the foundations of international cooperation and goodwill that are essential to solving global crises. Now, to alleviate the climate crisis, a massive mobilization of resources is required. A large part of this capital investment could come directly from the substantial resources that would be released once nuclear disarmament is implemented. At the same time, the scientific talents and political resources currently involved in nuclear weapons can then be redirected to seek ecological innovations. On the other hand, the solution to both threats must necessarily involve the entire international community. It is essential to channel the efforts of humanity towards fostering a culture of peace and strengthening the multilateral regime. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or the TPNW, which was adopted at the UN in July of 2017 by 122 countries, is a solid step in this direction. The universalization and implementation of the TPNW will strengthen the multilateral regime and promote scientific diplomacy and international cooperation, which are essential elements for tackling climate change.
15:30.
I'm about to be done. The signing and ratification of the TPNW must therefore be seen as urgent actions within the framework of the climate crisis. One final note here, the time for rhetoric is over. Now we're faced with this double existential dilemma. Humanity finds itself at a crossroads. We can either ensure our prosperity or ensure our own destruction. More than ever, the world needs dialogue, social participation, and pragmatic leaders that are able to listen to science, make courageous decisions, and enact and implement constructive policies. It is imperative to give peace a chance. Our very existence depends on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Your presentation really helped us to understand the current threats we are facing and truly sets the tone for this evening's event. And so next we will have Benetick Maddison. He is the project specialist for youth climate nuclear issues at the Marshallese Educational Initiative and an advisor of Reverse the Trend. He will talk about the impacts of climate change, nuclear weapons, and the COVID-19 crisis amongst the Marshallese community.
Thank you. Yahweh and greetings. Thank you to our organizers and sponsors for the opportunity to speak today. I can still remember it like it was yesterday. My elementary school principal pulled my first grade classmates and I out of class together at the school library for a show and tell that she wanted to share with us. To my surprise, the presentation was about her trip to the Marshall Islands that year. She showed us photos and talked about the 8,000-mile journey from Arkansas to the Marshall Islands. For a trip that long, patience was not on her side. She was eager to set foot on Marshallese soil, but had to make a layover in Hawaii for a couple of hours to connect flights. And off she went on her second flight. From Hawaii to the Marshall Islands, all they could see were clouds and the ocean below them. No sight of islands yet. She waited and waited until out of nowhere, there they were, God's long-lost emerald necklaces floating on the water, as if they have just risen from the depths of the sea, as the plane was making its way to Midero, the capital of the Marshall Islands. When I saw the photos, it was a very emotional moment for me. As a first grader, I did not have access to a computer, because first graders did not use computers then. My parents had those old Nokia phones that did not have access to the internet yet. And so seeing my homeland again for the first time in photos with the beautiful white sandy beaches, the lush green forest, and the blue turquoise water, after leaving a few years prior, gave me tears and a big smile. It was comforting to know at a young age that my homeland was still there. Even though I am physically here in the States, thousands of miles away, my heart is still back home. The Marshall Islands has been the home of my people for more than 4,000 years. We have survived living on the islands for this long, even though they are isolated and resources are scarce. But I credit our survival to the cultural values of our ancestors that we, their descendants, are still embracing today. The cultural values of love, respect, kindness, and togetherness are essential aspects of our close-knit society. Our cultural values are not only reserved for people, but also for the environment. Marshallese culture, if one takes the time to learn about it, is also based on sustainability and conservation. For example, traditional Marshallese canoes are made from natural materials such as coconut fibers, breadfruit trees, to name a few. Several other examples are the hand-woven baskets, necklaces, hats, bags, navigational stick charts, and many other handicrafts made from natural materials too. And when making canoes, homes, or crafts in general, Marshallese artisans and builders are careful not to overproduce to ensure that there is enough resources for future generations. It is also the same with fishing and gathering food. People, especially those living in the outer islands, continue to embrace the lifestyles of our ancestors. Unfortunately, the sustainable Marshallese way of life is under threat. The Marshall Islands are on the front line of the climate crisis, and while others may think climate change is years or decades away, it is already impacting vulnerable places like the Marshalls. Yet, we are only responsible for a small, teeny tiny bit of the total global emissions. Relatives and friends back home have said that some of the beaches that my family and I used to enjoy over 20 years ago are no longer there. The islands are prone to extreme drought and flooding conditions that have worsened over the years, which then leads to shortages of food and water for the people. The Marshall Island is also faced with the issues of coral bleaching due to our oceans warming up and overfishing by foreign fishing vessels. These environmental problems and exploitation of our resources will continue to force more Marshallese to migrate to the United States in search of better opportunities for them and their families. These are not all the environmental problems in the Marshall Islands, though. Marshallese are faced with the stark reality that we may someday lose our homeland if the world continues the path of destruction. The islands are on average 6 feet above sea level, and to make matters worse, the nuclear legacy left behind by the United States is still there. Between 1946 and 1958, the US used the islands to test 67 nuclear weapons, or equivalent to 7,200 Hiroshima bombs. In the mid-1970s, the US built a concrete dome on Enewetak, one of the two islands used for nuclear testing, and dumped nuclear waste into the structure that has been leaking nuclear contaminants into the fragile environment. Scientists have warned the Marshallese government that if the islands were under water today, the dome would break open and release all of its deadly contents. As a result of the testing program, the Marshall Islands and the US signed the first Compact of Free Association in 1986, which allows for Marshallese to migrate to the US for employment, education, and other reasons. We are not only experiencing the ecological effects of the nuclear test, but biological as well. We have some of the highest rates of cancer, diabetes, and other nuclear-related diseases, and during the pandemic, the Marshallese community suffered greatly. Many members of our community, many of them elders, passed away due to COVID-19, and data have shown that Marshallese are more prone to getting COVID-19 due to the health issues that we have inherited from the nuclear legacy. During the pandemic, the Marshallese Educational Initiative, the organization I work for, distributed food, personal protective equipment, and cleaning supplies, as well as funeral, utility, and rental assistance to the Marshallese community in the Northwest Arkansas region. The governments of the Marshall Islands and the United States are currently negotiating for another Compact of Free Association. It is my hope that the next compact will address many of the problems facing my people, including the twin issues of nuclear and climate change. For the Marshall Islands, time is running out. The US, the world, well, all of us must do more to create a livable planet for all to not only survive but thrive, and so that future Marshallese generations will live with the comfort of knowing that they have a home to go back to, and so that they can preserve and protect their culture for many more years to come. Komodada, thank you.
Thank you so much, Benetick, for sharing about the situation among your community. Now we will have a special presentation from a representative of the Algonquin First Nation who works with the Kebaowek First Nation near Quebec, Canada, and a lawyer who works closely with First Nations. Kacie McLaren is a 25-year-old Algonquin environmental technician for Kebaowek Land Management and Resources, and Kerrie Blaise is a lawyer from the Canadian Environmental Law Association. Thank you for being here. You now have the floor.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, so everyone, my name is Kacie McLaren. I'm an environmental tech for Kebaowek First Nation. Next slide, please. So I'm here to briefly just talk to you about the situation that's happening in Canada in regards to consultations and impact assessments and everything like that. So for Canada, there's currently 630 First Nation communities. Of that, there's 50 First Nations representing 50 Indigenous language. So for some example, there's myself, Algonquin, there's also some Cree, there is Mohawk, and those are just a few examples of some. The traditional territory of the Algonquin Nation includes 11 First Nations communities that reside along the Ottawa River watershed, straddling the Quebec and Ontario borders. So it is very important to know that Algonquins have never replenished our rights or title to our territory or rights as Algonquin people. Next slide, please. So being situated along the Ottawa River, which means that we use the waterways as a way of transportation and a way of life. So we also refer to the Ottawa River as the Kichisibi, known as the Big River, because it flows from north central Quebec all the way to headwaters, including Bird Rock and Montreal and the Chaudière Falls. Once again, we have never gave up our rights, our titles, or any land. Also, it's very important to know that the waterways were a basic, unit of measurement for traditional purposes. So for example, waterway serves as boundaries for trap lines, the borders for different communities. So for example, borders between Algonquins and Crees, between, for example, Kebaowek First Nation and Wolf Lake First Nations. And between that, there was always like meetings. So you're able to always like kind of know what's going on throughout the territory. And through that, come up with your own way to mitigate climate change, for example, or over harvesting or any kind of activities like that. Next slide, please. So a little bit about where I'm personally from. So like I said, my name is Kacie McLaren. I'm 25 years old. I am an Algonquin from Kebaowek First Nation, and I currently work at our Lands Management and Resources Department as an environmental technician. So Kebaowek First Nation is one of 11 recognized communities making up the Algonquin nations. There's currently 291 members on reserve. I currently do not live on reserve, but I am 15 minutes away. I just moved away recently, but throughout my whole 25 years, I was on reserve. And I think that's very special and very good to know because I had my culture growing up and everything. We were established in 1975 on a 53-acre parcel reserve located on Kipwa Lake, which is 15 kilometers from the Ontario-Quebec border that is straddling the Ottawa River. So like I mentioned before, members currently reside here. We live, work here, we practice our traditions, and it's also important to know that just because we are located on the Quebec side does not mean that we don't practice in the Ontario. Back in the day, there was no boundaries, there was no province boundaries or anything. Like I said, our waterways were the boundaries, our borders for us. Next slide, please. Okay, so bear with me here. This is a little bit of timeline about the history of how First Nations were first, I guess I could say, integrated in this whole consolation, harmonization practice. So in the 1970s, the signatory to the Peace of Friendship Treaties of Oshogachi and Kanawaki of 1760s with Britain. And then in 1760s, the Royal Proclamations was issued by Britain. In around the 1900s, that's when the territory really got overexploited, and it was really a big pressure on the First Nations. That's when forestry companies came in, pulp and paper mills. Paper was really hitting the market. So a lot of us got pushed out of our territories and forced into reserves that we now reside in today. So in 1982, the Canadian Act under Section 35 of the Constitution recognized and affirmed the existence of Aboriginal and treaty rights. So that means we were able to, or they just recognized that we were able to hunt, fish, trap, gather, practice traditional ceremonies, do anything traditional. They recognized that as a right to do. So in 2007, UNDRIP was actually implemented. And UNDRIP is the United Declaration. Wait, I don't know too much about this. I'm still learning this. There's a lot to learn, but it was implemented to protect the rights of First Nations. So like I said earlier, so we can hunt, fish, trap, practice our traditions and everything. So what I found very interesting when trying to do a little research was that actually in 2013, Kebaowek First Nation, Wolf Lake, and Timiskaming First Nation actually established a statement of asserted rights, claiming an area that the ancestral territory of the Algonquins was that of these three First Nations, meaning that any activities that happened had to be like any activities on the land, including forestry, road construction, any activity at all would have to be like come back to us, we'd have to be informed and essentially a part of the project. Next slide, please. So that's where it comes to nation-nations relationships. So the obligation in Canada is the duty to consult and accommodate with Aboriginal First Nations people when the Crown compensates for their territory. So like I said, for example, if forestry companies want to come in, they have to consult with us, make sure they're not destroying any sacred grounds, burials, plants, anything like that. Excuse me. So the duty flows from the honor of the Crown to this fiduciary relationship with Indigenous people that can give a rise to fiduciary duty to Indigenous people, meaning that we would essentially have the right and we can make the decision what happens on our land, as in we can agree to the project or disagree and not let it happen unless there's more need for it. So we know from past historical events that this duty was not honored, just from previous mining activities, everything like that, like on the news and stuff, you could see it's still to this day not being representative, acknowledged. So we do understand that the government does want to change this, but it's to develop that relationship with First Nations people. So the duty to care. So they have to understand that Algonquins have a very, very, very strong relationship to the land. Everything we do is based around the land. Not even essentially for us per se, but for 7 future generations. So we don't think in that mindset of, if we take now, it won't be here. No, it's like, if we have the tallest plant, we won't take that tallest plant. The second tallest plant, no, we'll go to the 7th one to ensure that our future generation can survive and still be able to thrive. And also they have to really make sure that they're listening to us. That's what I really find is that they don't listen, like they'll consult us, but only just to check a checkbox off per se. So moving to historical and current events. So like I previously said, before COVID consultations, it was improving. You know, we were informed on every project. We did get to offer a say. However, we weren't actually involved, and that's where the conversations need to change, because this is First Nation territory, Indigenous territory. We need to be involved in all aspects of the project, you know, not just, okay, do you have a concern? Where is it? We'll protect it. You know, we really need to be involved from all aspects, because there is some knowledge that, you know, that Western knowledge doesn't account for. So we really got to just enforce that. So what I guess Algonquins are requesting is that Canada acknowledges and recognizes our traditional knowledge, that Indigenous First Nation communities are included in all scopes of the project. So not just at the beginning, you know, come to us at first, before the project idea is even complete. Let us get our inputs in. That way, this whole process will be smoother, you know, everything will be more laid out. Train and educate our people to understand what's happening, you know, because we're not used to this whole Western science, you know. I know it's been around long enough, but a lot of our people are still excluded and in remote communities. So it's not, we need training, we need our people involved, and we need to know how to be involved. So next slide. Okay, so yeah, that's all from my part. Chiwigwech, everyone. I hope I wasn't too shaky. I was kind of like really nervous, but thank you.
Thank you, Kacie. And briefly, I'm going to turn to a new trend in Canada revolving around nuclear technology and small modular reactors that directly implicates Kebaowek First Nation. And I'm Kerrie Blaise, and I'm a staff lawyer at the Canadian Environmental Law Association. And I do work closely with Kebaowek First Nation in this development of the small modular reactor in Algonquin territory. So there is a trend in Canada. It's being supported by the federal government and likewise being funded by the federal government to support industry's vision for a new type of nuclear reactor known as a small modular reactor. There is much opposition to this from environmental groups, Indigenous organizations, who are calling for a halt to the funding of these SMRs. Of great concern is the relaxation we have seen in Canada regarding safety and environmental regulations, calls from industry to reduce liability for accidents, and also remove environmental assessments altogether. Underscoring this proposal, we need to understand that nuclear technology is inherently dangerous. And so if the process itself that we're going through as members of the public, as members of our communities, doesn't account for those consequences, there could be dire consequences should SMRs be installed. So the reason we raise this today is, should Canada move forward with small modular reactors? The first is to be located in the Algonquin Nation traditional territory. And this is a demonstration project for the future commercialization of SMRs. As Kacie spoke of, Kebaowek First Nation has clearly stated what the requirements are for consultation, for engagement, but Canada's nuclear regulator continues to move forward in decision-making. Canada continues to move forward with plans for small modular reactors, despite express requests for a halt in decision-making. And so where we need to go from here, quite simply, is again, we need to replace industry rhetoric that these designs are inherently safe, that they're good for climate change, and change that with rhetoric around accountability for environmental debts, for accidents, for radioactive waste, potential radiological accidents. And we need to ensure we are upholding UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and ultimately, end of the day, ensure our legal frameworks empower consultation, empower the public to access information and participate in decisions which directly affect their local community. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for that amazing presentation. So next, we're going to hear about the situation amongst First Nations in the United States. We're going to hear from Devon Parfait, who is the future chief of the Grand Calliou Dulac Band of Biloxi-Chitimacha-Choctaw, and he will talk about his community and share his views on the necessity for all of us to protect the earth.
Thanks, Sophia. So I'm going to take a second and share my screen. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Almost 100 people. That's pretty cool. And thank you for inviting me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up. Okay, so hi. My name is Devon Parfait. I'm a geoscience major here at Williams. I'm an Allison Davis Research Fellow and the future chief of the Grand Calliou Dulac Band of Biloxi-Chitimacha-Choctaw. And just someone who's really passionate about the water, the land, and the people who live on this planet. Now, before I get started, I want to put in a quick plug for this National Geographic documentary called Impact, hosted by Gal Gadot, or Wonder Woman, which looks at 6 stories of inspiring women across the world who are making real change in their communities. And my chief happens to be one of them, Chief Sherelle. So if you find yourself wanting to learn more, there are lots of things I could point you to now, but this is something to keep on your radar. So to tell you a little bit about me, I'm from Louisiana, a state that is known for its melting pot of different cultures, food, and music that is unique to most, but home to me. I'm originally from way down the bayou in a town called Dulac, and you can see there it's circled. And my home didn't look much different from this one, except it wasn't raised. We lived right on the bayou. We have always lived off the land and the water. My grandpa had a shrimp boat, so we would go shrimping with my cousins. We would fish right off the dock. We had a worm bed, a garden, and I even had friends who would sometimes jump in the water and swim after small gators. It was a great life, and living from the land and being down south just felt right. However, in 2005, Hurricane Katrina and Rita hit Louisiana, and my family home was caught in the storm surge of Rita. My old family home had survived quite a few storms before, but these storms were much worse. And by the time the water finally went down, we found that we had lost everything that we didn't pack up with us, basically. And from that point on, I ended up moving around all my life, being disconnected from the place I grew up with, the friends I had grown up with, and even my own identity in some ways. But my story is only part of the larger story of the various issues that are negatively affecting the tribes of Southern Louisiana and people, and even more communities around the world with the climate change problems we're all facing today. And one of the biggest threats that communities in the South face is land loss due to sea level rise, and some scientists estimate it to be a cumulative average of a football field of land loss an hour. And there are many factors that contribute to that land loss and the other issues that we see. So Southern Louisiana is a geologically young delta that formed from the Mississippi River, and it's only about 0 to 1.5 meters above sea level, which is really short. And because the delta is so young, it has clay sediments that compact over time in a process that's called subsidence. And along with sea level rise, because of climate change, it compounds onto one another. And part of the biggest reason why you see some of the dramatic land loss that happens. The oil and gas industry, with its pipelines and canals, drives subsidence. And you can see in this picture just how pervasive the oil and gas industry is in Louisiana. Saltwater intrusion, because of these straight line canals, the winding waterways used to allow for a gradient of saltwater, but now the saltwater just comes in, and we get things like ecosystem collapse, invasive species, and soil that isn't good to plant or farm in anymore, just to name a few things. And hurricanes. When a big hurricane comes in, it brings storm surge and high energy wave impacts that damages and erodes our coasts and barrier islands and displaces people like me and my family. And that storm surge and rainfall also inundates the coast. And as climate change continues, these storms will worsen. There were 8 storms in the Gulf back in 2020. That's a lot. And the storms are going to get more frequent with higher wind speeds and more precipitation. And all of these issues are disproportionately affecting Native Americans physically and socioeconomically. It is well known that as you travel down the bayou in Louisiana, the percentage of people of color becomes greater. And during the colonization of America, natives were pushed down as far down south as you can go, into what was even considered back then unlivable lands. And the tribes down south are struggling, not only with losing our lands and trying to preserve our culture and way of life because we're so intimately connected to the land, but also struggling to survive in this new world. This pie chart shows the percentage of Dulac natives and their educational attainment. In my hometown of Dulac, it's pretty low, with almost half the population, shown in dark blue, having less than a high school degree and even fewer getting some college experience, if a degree at all. A small portion of the population has not had any schooling at all, shown in light blue. This one compares poverty rates of the region, with 28% of Dulac residents in poverty. That is compared to the national poverty rate of 10.5%. And the reality of poverty down south gets even worse when you compare it by race. The smaller bars represent income in Louisiana overall, while the larger ones represent Dulac. And you can see that whites are making a comfortable $57,000 a year, while natives in that same region are only earning about $8,000 for the entire year. And traditionally, my people would live off the land, not only for sustenance, but also as a way to make a living. And now everything is being threatened because of this extractive mindset that persists throughout time. And also, our government has been a huge problem in many different ways. The Louisiana Coastal Master Plan is a plan that is supposed to help restore Louisiana's coast within about 50 years. It's supposed to resediment the coast. But Chief Sherrill of my tribe says that we only have about 20 to 25 years before our lands are wiped away. So they're not operating on a timeline that is considerate of these communities. And the Land Reclamation Act in Louisiana states that lands that are sunken and then rebuilt are then owned by the state. So erasing these communities and then giving the state access to mineral rights for more extraction from the land. And there are many more examples that I could get into, but it is just no secret that all of these tribal communities are not in control of their own destiny. There are big decision makers that don't even include natives in the conversation, and we have to live with every decision and consequence that comes through. One of the most popular phrases today that's suggested when talking about tribal resettlement because of these issues is managed retreat. And that's scary. Managed by who? It's certainly not us. And it's really scary for me because I'm a part of this community getting managed, as opposed to being part of the management team. There is a legacy of exploitation that goes way beyond what is happening with climate change today. And these new decisions with climate adaptation continues to pile on impact after impact on these frontline communities. Now, I knew that these problems existed, and people like my chief always told me that I was capable of doing something to help. But I really struggled with my education for a long time until I finally got the opportunity to pursue a degree at Williams. And I fought tooth and nail to get in from the community college that I was going to, and even had some of the most transformative experiences of my life, like the Williams Mystic program, in which I traveled the country. I went to the East Coast and the West Coast, got to experience the world in a new way, learn how to do science for the first time, and even had some pretty incredible memories with some pretty great people along the way. And with all of the opportunities that I've been so grateful to receive, I have been able to do my own research at the college that has allowed me to prove with my own science that Native Americans are disproportionately affected by coastal land loss. I've been able to give talks and presentations about it, much like this one, and bring awareness to just some of the issues that Louisiana faces. I've also been able to work on a Native State Commission to establish a working relationship between the tribes and our government, and much more. We can move forward toward a better, more just, and sustainable future that puts the earth and the people first by passing down knowledge, engaging the community with the world, and providing opportunities to help move the dial forward in any way possible. This planet, we share it, and we should all take care of it together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devon. So now we will hear from Kendra Pinto, a young Diné woman from the Eastern Agency of the Navajo Nation, who will share with us about how the Navajo First Nation is addressing multiple crises. She will also share about how she became involved in the work, who she worked with in terms of allies, work done within the health impact assessment process, current conditions near my house, and ways in which her community has taken action and how others can take action.
Thank you. Yeah, hey everyone. I'm Shea Kendra Pinto. Touching in slow key ani bashishteen. My name is Kendra Pinto, and I reside in the Eastern Agency of the Navajo Nation in northwestern New Mexico. I'm in an area called the San Juan Basin. It's also known as the checkerboard, meaning it's an assortment of land managed by federal, state, tribal, allotment, and private landowners. Currently, the Bureau of Land Management's Farmington Field Office covers 1.4 million acres of public lands, and there are over 40,000 active and inactive oil and gas wells. This creates a spider web of miscommunication that can happen relating to how the land within this area should be used. Some say, let's develop and survive today, while others say, let's stop and recognize potential negative impacts to our food and water. But what we need to remember is that every decision we make now will affect our future generations and their quality of life. In my area, there's really no set boundaries that you can see on the land. 1 second, you can be walking on tribal lands, and within the next 50 feet, you can be on BLM public lands. This is the case for the area I'm in. I currently have 3 oil and gas well sites within a 1 mile radius of home. It is because of the explosion of the number of sites that it really got me involved. I grew up in this area, so I can see how much the land has changed and how it's continuing to change with development for oil and gas. I have noticed the air within my area change. It used to be that we occasionally smell gas odors from newly placed hydraulic fracturing sites, but with continued conversations about the impacts of fracking over the past few years, it has led to some changes. The immediate location in the San Juan Basin poses a problem in the Department of Oversight. Maintenance on every single well should happen, but realistically, how many of these sites are checked annually? I have personally gone out into the field with earthworks and a forward-looking infrared camera. Finding and recording leaking and venting emissions is tedious and way dangerous work, but work that nonetheless needs to be done. Taking initiative to log disparities felt by local communities is a step in the right direction when it comes to putting their health and safety as a priority. Even from every community experiencing, this type of oil and gas industrial activity should be a part of the conversation from the beginning and throughout the entire process. After all, we are the ones that are dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. I think the conversation around fracking has changed over time in the tri-chapter area, but that change can be so incremental that sometimes it's hard to imagine data collection as a game changer. It is definitely worth the time and energy to be more involved at the on-the-ground level. It's important and needed. Back when I became involved with the oil activity, checking it out and just being aware, there was very little data on the counselor and surrounding areas when it came to air quality and available information to the public. Even with provided literature of public health dangers and fracking, it was a hard issue to discuss in this area. This changed with the proposal of a health impact assessment. By 2019, we had a working HIA that we could share. It was a huge step in highlighting the issues the tri-chapter residents felt with the boom in fracking nearby. I'd like to thank Samuel Sage, the community service coordinator at Counselor Chapter House, for connecting me with the individuals I spoke with during our HIA process. It was a huge undertaking, and we were lucky enough to team up with local tribal officials as well as allies that have experience in this type of work. We worked with a team that understood the need to look at the impacts of hydraulic fracturing from a health perspective. Constant communication was key, especially in the chosen region of the tri-chapter. If you're not familiar with this area, the tri-chapter includes Counselor, Ojo Encino, and Torreon, and they're pretty spread out in terms of distance. Previously, I've taken air samples using the bucket brigade method at 4 sites in 2017 in Liebrecht and Counselor. One of the samples did come back with elevated levels of hydrogen sulfide. This was quite concerning, considering this sample was taken less than 2,000 feet away from an elementary school. Reporting the test results first to the host, then to state legislators was imperative. Along with members of the Greater Choctaw Coalition, the results were shared with congressional members and legislation staff in Santa Fe and DC with the urgent message: take a serious look at the impacts of fracking and how it affects local communities who are directly placed in harm's way. The HIA was a great vessel of information on oil activity affecting people's everyday routine. It was a small package, if you will, that we could deliver directly to the local community members, as well as legislators who are chosen to represent the community and must make decisions that affect numerous livelihoods. In April 2019, Danielle Stowe's Fracking is a Fracking Reality Tour graciously hosted Congresswoman Deborah Holland, Congressman Alan Lowenthal, Raul Grijalva, and Ben Ray Lujan. The tour gave a firsthand look at what the community is dealing with. We were lucky enough to have Earthworks present during the tour with a forward-looking infrared lens camera. It allowed the naked eye to see venting and or leaking emissions. I believe it was a major eye-opener for the congressional staff. They were visibly shocked by what they saw. I too was shocked the first time I looked through the flare camera. As a community member, I felt it was important to get involved because this is my home. I plan to grow old in this area, and it would be great if I had clean air and water. If you don't know, the Navajo Nation is a food desert, so it's pretty crucial to have the basics like water. I encourage folks to take action in protecting their community's health and safety, whether it's calling your local state representative, signing a local petition, or finding and being aware of public commenting periods for state or federal legislation that are directly involved with the oil and gas sector. If you're on the Navajo Nation, request an air monitor at your local chapter house. You know, there are many ways to get involved and be active. These are just a few ways that I've done it and some suggestions to others. If you would like to learn more about the oil and gas issue in the Greater Choctaw region, please visit frackoffchaco.org. And I want to thank everyone today that I am presenting with because it's been such an eye-opener and everyone's story is beautiful. And I thank you for sharing. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Kendra. Next, we will hear about how NGOs are promoting youth activism within the context of today's discussion. We will first hear from Silvia Cantu, an SDG youth scholar from Peace Boat, USA.
Hello, everyone. I'll just share my screen really quick. Perfect. Let's present. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Silvia Cantu, and I am from Monterrey, Mexico. I am a Peace Boat Youth for the SDGs scholar. I will be sharing a little bit more about what is Peace Boat, a little bit about the program that I participated in, so you can learn more about youth activism within the organization in a way that you can collaborate with us. So what is Peace Boat? Well, Peace Boat is a civil society nonprofit organization based in Japan that is working to promote peace, sustainable development, human rights, and respect for the environment through educational programs that are organized on board a ship, which is traveling all around the world on peace voyages. The ship creates a neutral mobile space where people can engage, they can have discussions across borders, across language, and dialogue and mutual cooperation. And this happens at sea as well as at the ports that we visit. On this image, you can look at some of the ports that we visit and the different voyages we have. Each different color line, it's a different type of voyage. As you can see, we're really everywhere, and we have partners and programs at all of these different locations. Peace education, it's the driving force behind all of these voyages. We have guest educators coming to the ship to deliver workshops, talks, all kinds of different events. And they come from all around the world, and they discuss many different issues, many different topics, many of those related to climate justice, public health, education. And so these events allow the community on the ship to learn about new issues, maybe new things that they had never heard before, as well as engage with topics that they've always been passionate about. And it's a very inclusive, very accessible, very diverse space for learning for people of all ages and all backgrounds. Peace Vote, as an international NGO, it's been sailing around the world for over 37 years now. Peace Vote is also an official partner of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, which won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. Peace Vote has also led more than 60 global voyages, 30 regional voyages, and in these voyages, it tends to have around 1,000 passengers from all around the world. Peace Vote also visits over 100 ports in more than 80 countries. So it's truly a truly global experience. When you look at the ship and you look at its side, you can see that it has two logos. One of them, it's the logo of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And that's because as we are traveling, we are promoting the implementation and the localization of these goals everywhere we go, to all the communities that we visit. The other logo that we have on the ship is the ICAN logo. And so as we travel, we also promote the nuclear disarmament, the abolishment of nuclear weapons through many different activities, as you will hear in a second, but many of them are focused on the arts, arts exhibits, sharing testimonies, having conferences. There is definitely a wide variety of events that the community on the ship leads so they can promote nuclear disarmament across the world. But before I tell you a little bit about the program that I joined, I want to share a little bit about myself and what motivated me to apply. So I am a certified PADI advanced scuba diver and a conservation photographer. I majored in political science with a focus on environmental policy, and I've always been really passionate about the ocean. I've always loved being underwater and spending time with marine animals. And so that was really it for me. That was my passion and what really drew me to fight for climate justice. As a photographer, I was also always really excited to portray the beautiful landscapes that we inhabit, all the geographies, the places that we love, as well as the animal and plant species that we want to protect. And so for many years, I focused my work precisely on this, on capturing what felt like the beauty of all the world. But also there were moments where I had to take a moment to reflect and capture scenes that were not beautiful to look at, but that were necessary for us to reflect on, because they really conveyed the sense of urgency that we needed to take into account as we were fighting for climate justice. So having all of this in mind, I heard from a few friends about this program, Youth for the SDGs. They had participated in the program previous years. And so they told me about the opportunity, and I felt like it was a perfect fit, because this program, the Youth for the Sustainable Development Goals Scholarship, it's meant for young people who are working to advance the Sustainable Development Goals in their own communities. So they're invited to join Peace Boat, and for this unique experiential learning program that in my case lasted 2 weeks, where we got to discuss and learn more about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I joined the trip of the spring of 2019, the South America program, which was focused on SDGs 13, climate action, and SDG 14, life below water. So now you can see why it was a great fit for me. I joined the program, the South America program, which sailed from Ushuaia in Argentina all the way up to Valparaiso, Chile. So basically around the Patagonia. I had never been there. It was a lovely experience. While I was on the ship, I led talks on the role of women in scuba diving, on conservation photography, ocean acidification, and the role of the youth in decision-making, environmental policy, all of that. Also, while I was on the ship, I got to hear from my other fellows, from my other friends who were in the program, on the intersections of public health, mental health, the environment, the climate crisis, the arts, entrepreneurship, many different topics that we were all really passionate about. So we got to really learn a lot from each other while we were there. As we started the program, we had a field trip where we went up a glacier in Ushuaia in Argentina, Glaciar Marcial. And it was a very eye-opening experience because we got to interact with the local communities who are protecting these glaciers. And we also learned about how quickly they are shrinking because of climate change. So while we were really excited to be there in the Patagonia, it was also difficult to process all of these changes, but they definitely helped set the tone for all of the actions that we wanted to take while on the ship and after we left the program. But definitely one of the most impactful experiences for me as a youth for the SDGs on the ship was meeting the Hibakusha survivors. So the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. My group of scholars, we actually got to spend an entire afternoon with survivor Junko Watanabe from Hiroshima. And we learned so much from her. She told us everything about her experience, how it was like living after the bombings happened, how she developed her own activism, her own campaigns, and she was spreading all this knowledge around the world. It was definitely a very important moment for us to hold space for that conversation and to really reflect on the interactions, and the consequences of these bombings. So on human health, on the environment, on history and culture, to really process that as a group and think of ways that we could all collectively take action. And it was also really important for me learning that a lot of the Hibakushas are located in Latin America. Ms. Junko Watanabe was actually located in Brazil, and a lot of her work was happening in Brazil, but there were Hibakushas also in Mexico. So it was really important for me to learn about that and get involved after the program. And this is a picture as well of the program, but this was at the very end when we got to visit the Economic Commission, the UN Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean in Santiago, Chile, where we got to share all of the things that we had reflected on while on the program and our demands as well, for climate action, for nuclear disarmament and peace education. And even though the program only lasted 2 weeks, I really feel like I created a family within Peace Boat. And ever since then, I've been really involved in a lot of their events. And in fact, last year in the summer of 2020, I joined Peace Boat as a summer intern to help organize the UN World Oceans Day events for 2020. And so we got to really organize a lot of really fun presentations, film screenings, conferences, academic conferences, where I got to learn a lot more about marine conservation. And I also feel like one of the main takeaways of that summer was learning how to adapt given the COVID pandemic, and to really also reflect on the intersection between the pandemic and the climate crisis, and be really creative in terms of how to create these accessible spaces online for us to keep having these conversations from our homes all around the world. And so just to close, I want to really invite you to keep in touch with Peace Boat. Right now, we are not sailing for obvious reasons, but hopefully in the near future, we will resume programs. Either way, there's many events that we are always organizing online. So please, reach out. There's an email, there's a webpage. You can also find us on Instagram. To learn more about the different programs, to know how you can get involved. There's volunteer opportunities, internships. There's also chances to work as a translator, volunteer as a translator, or as a language instructor on the ship. So there's definitely plenty of ways to get involved. So I really invite you to get to know us a bit more. And thank you. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. I'm really honored to share this space with so many amazing people.
Thank you so much, Silvia. And so finally, our last speaker, we have Danielle Samler, the Research and Admin Officer of the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy and a coordinator of Reverse the Trend. She will discuss how RTP is working to promote youth activism.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening. A big thank you to all the speakers that have shared their thoughts, stories, and expertise with us tonight. My name is Danielle Samler, and I am one of the 3 project coordinators for Reverse the Trend, and I'm also a research officer for the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, or LCNP. Reverse the Trend is an educational and advocacy network that provides youth with resources to understand the nexus between nuclear weapons and climate change, encourage movement building through the arts, and create opportunities for youth to share their histories. We primarily focus on our work on educating and empowering youth from frontline communities who have been impacted by either nuclear weapons and/or climate change. We have done this by creating an online community forum for youth to plan, organize, and mobilize. We have held previous webinars highlighting youth and have really been engaging with frontline communities, listening to what is important to them, and working with them in the form of creative workshops where they can freely express themselves and their perspectives on how nuclear testing and climate change have personally affected their lives. If you'd like to contribute to our work, you can do so by clicking on the link that one of my colleagues will put in the chat box. And you can also visit our website at rttreversingthetrend.com, which will also be in the chat box. When we started this initiative, it was primarily because we believe that today's youth are the ones that have the power to make a real difference and make the future they want and deserve a reality. We have seen this through successful youth-led movements on gun reform, climate change, and social justice, among others. And the success of these movements has partially been because of their momentum and size, but also because of the way in which we as youth are able to personalize the issues and make policymakers and decision makers understand not only the big picture, but each individual story and history that make up the big picture. With Reverse the Trend, we're doing this through using art as a tool for activism and advancing educational and community building tools. Our educational curriculum covers topics in international law, international humanitarian law, human rights law, environmental law, nuclear disarmament, climate change, and activism, among others. Something that I personally am invested in is emphasizing the legal education surrounding these issues. It is important that as youth activists, we not only have the passion and the drive to create sustainable change, but we also need to have the proper tools to effectively create that change. We as youth must be inspired on an emotional level to act on these issues, capturing the emotional, moral, and ethical consequences of nuclear weapons and climate change. But we must also have practical and legal knowledge to reinforce and strengthen our arguments to policymakers and governments. Once we understand states' legal obligations, we can begin to critically analyze how and why states are not upholding these legal obligations. One recent example is the entry into force of the TPNW. There has been a massive amount of mobilization behind this treaty, and it will prove to be an effective way to strengthen the norm against nuclear weapons. While this treaty is only binding on state parties, other areas of international law, including international humanitarian law, human rights law, and customary law, have long supported the illegality of nuclear weapons use, testing, and threat of use. If we as youth are educated on and inspired by these issues, then we can call out states for their actions, confronting leaders in a way that they are not used to seeing by youth. With this knowledge, we can then effectively mobilize and ensure that policymakers and decision makers take us seriously. In order to make the future we want a reality, we must make our voices heard and ensure that we have all the necessary tools to create systemic and sustainable change. It is our hope that Reverse the Trend will inspire youth mobilization on these issues and will create a truly global network of activists, all advocating for a better, safer, and cleaner future. Thank you very much. I am honored to be here and have learned so much this evening.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you all for your interventions. We just heard from such an amazing group of activists, and now I would like to open the floor for a more interactive discussion with our audience. So we're going to be transitioning into our Q&A portion. And so I'm first going to begin with some questions that have already been pre-submitted by members of our audience. So here is our first question. Working for dismantling nuclear weapons as the key priority may need to begin by addressing the following. Such a prospect even is within NPT agreement. As nuclear power holders are avoiding the responsibilities for it within NPT, how shall they be punished? As there is no mechanism punishing them, therefore a key priority shall be establishing a new convention nuclear weapons, and the youth energy is best served towards these efforts, demanding the nuclear weapons power holders for such a convention. I hope you get a chance to make note of this point during the presentations. We need both the young and parents generation to work together. And so I know that was pretty long, so I'm also going to copy and paste that into the chat. And then we can start off. I will open the floor to any of our presenters who want to answer that question. But also, I think maybe Carlos, you might be a good person to start with answering this question, but I'll also give you a chance to read it in the chat, because like I said, I know it was a pretty long question.
Hi, Sophia. Yeah, I'll take this one. It's pretty long, but quite clear. Yeah, it talks about the question talks about punishment to the states that belong to the NPT, and what happens with the states that are not upholding their obligations. So we have to be clear of one thing. The problem that we have right now is nuclear weapons, and we have to think about the best way to achieve nuclear disarmaments. And Danielle just mentioned it in her presentation now, strengthening the norm building. The NPT, within the NPT, just to give an example, there's 9 nuclear weapon states, 5 of them belong to the NPT. The most recent one, North Korea, used to belong to the NPT, and it left. The 5 nuclear weapon states as defined by the treaty were supposed to disarm by 1995. But in 1995, the treaty was extended indefinitely, so they are still sort of within their right to disarm. However, the obligation for nuclear disarmament, as portrayed in Article 6, is seen as an obligation to all states parties of nuclear weapons. And that is what is changing right now. That nuclear disarmament is an obligation that befalls on the entire world, not just on the nuclear weapon states. And if we think about it, we have to think about why nuclear weapons are relevant, why states want to have nuclear weapons, why North Korea decided to leave the NPT and have nuclear weapons. That is actually the 9 nuclear weapon states right now are a symptom of a disease. And that is a disease that has been promoted by the entire world. It's this idea that nuclear weapons are placed on a pedestal and that they give you power and that they give you security. And this idea, we take it down by stigmatizing nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction because they do not discriminate between civilian and military targets. The other 4 weapons of mass destruction, which are chemical, biological, cluster munitions, and landmines, have been abolished. And the process that led to that abolishment was stigmatization. Currently, there's no states of boasting of being a biological weapons power or of using chemical weapons in their security doctrines, because we have very strong norms that make such claims taboo. And likewise, the United States never signed the landmines ban treaty or the Convention Against Cluster Munitions, but it got rid of these 2 weapons because there were no more buyers, there were no more investors, and there was in the world a climate of moral condemnation that made it politically unfavorable to continue having these weapons. So this is the process that we've entered with nuclear weapons. This is the process that we have now with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We have this norm, and this norm is strengthened by every single country in the world, but not just by the countries, by the participation of people, by the condemnation of nuclear weapons. We have to, all of us, build in and continue to send this message that nuclear weapons are immoral. Nuclear weapons are weapons that should not exist. We should spread awareness about what these nuclear weapons do, and then not only make it uncomfortable to have nuclear weapons, but make it politically unfavorable to have them. And thus we can make these countries want to disarm. And that's the process that is going on right now. So as long as the countries, as long as there is a role for nuclear weapons, as long as nuclear weapons can be used to project power, these countries are not going to want to disarm. They're going to disregard all the risks, all the expense, and they're just going to look away from their obligations. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. That was such a great answer. Thank you so much. And so I'm going to drop also in the chat another question that we had from an audience member beforehand. So it was, how can the Pacific Island nations overcome the challenges of climate change at this present time and after the pandemic, since they are most vulnerable to climate change? So again, we'll drop this into the chat. And Benetick, perhaps you can start with answering this question.
Thank you. I think the Pacific region should continue to reach out to their global partners for support, because again, they cannot address climate change alone, especially when this is a global crisis. And most of the Pacific Islands are developing states with scarce financial resources. And then secondly, they must look within to see ways to become self-reliant to combat the issue of climate change.
Amazing, thank you so much. And so the last question that we had beforehand was, what are the social problems that stem out of corporate exploitation on grassroots communities? So I just pasted that into the chat. Anyone who we had as a panelist, you can feel free to jump in and answer this. So I'll pause for a second and let anyone who's interested jump in, but otherwise I can also make a suggestion as for who I think would be a good fit for this question. I'll give you guys a couple seconds, but otherwise, Devon, do you want to answer this question?
Yes, sorry, I'm having a hard time with my video. There we go. What are the social problems that stem out of corporate exploitation of grassroots communities? Lots of them. I mean, exploitation from the land is one of the biggest ones. You have these corporations who, we live in a very for-profit system, and everything is based around profit instead of people. And whenever the land is there to be taken from, and there's no restrictions, regulations, or any way to stop these companies from taking the land, they do it. And one of the biggest problems down south is that these oil and gas companies, it's such a economic dead zone. There's not a lot of economic opportunities down south. So you have many natives who end up working in the oil and gas field because it's a way to make an income, provide something for their families. And so you also get a lot of people who have the mindset, like especially nowadays, that they're working for fossil fuels, and it's hard for them to see another way. And then it's even harder to try and move towards green energy, because there are some people who are so for fossil fuels, not only because it provides income for their lives and their families, but this is what's been happening throughout the generations. Many people have gone into the oil and gas field and worked that. My grandpa was a tugboat captain for most of his life, and he moved barrels of oil from the Mississippi to Texas in many different ways. And so there's a lot of social aspects, personal ones, and also physical ones that affect the land and the people. So that's my initial reaction, my initial thoughts.
Awesome. And then any of our other moderators, maybe would you care to join and answer this question?
Yeah, for sure. I'm gonna keep my video off just because I kind of got a little, the connection kind of faded a bit. It could have been on my side too. Social problems on my end I can think of is everything wants to benefit, like Devon said, is all money related. Especially for forestry, that's mostly what I deal in. Social problems also will include kind of diseases, outbreaks and stuff. So companies want to come in to cut more, which increases, the jobs. The jobs available around. And then they also offer it to our First Nations community, which creates a kind of conflict of interest, so you say, because, we're not totally for completely stripping the land, but at the same time, that's kind of the only job offer we really have around here. So it's kind of hard to find, like, is there a balance? What is that balance? And can we actually achieve a balance? Other social problems include road development. So a problem with that is there is so much hunting and fishing around our beautiful, beautiful territory that from the forestry, all these road constructions actually open up the territory, creating more non-Indigenous people to come in and actually invade the land and scare out our own Algonquin people. So that's kind of another problem. That's just something I can think off the top of my head right now.
Yeah, definitely. That was an awesome response. So I think that since we are about to end, we're almost out of time. I now would again like to open the floor. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to drop it or just open it to the entire floor. And then if nobody has any other questions, then we can also go ahead with closing remarks. Any panelists or audience, they can go ahead and do that. So I'll wait for another few seconds. Anyone who has a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. But otherwise, then we can go ahead with these closing statements. That we can go ahead into the closing portion of this. I really am so grateful that everyone attended tonight's event, and I hope that everyone has a great evening. And so how about we start with Carlos? Would you like to give any closing remarks? Like to give any closing remarks?
Hi, yes.
And then we can move if you have any closing remarks that you would like to give.
So yes, hi.
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, we have a little lag here. So yes, I would just basically pretty much like to say that in the same way that it is not enough to not be racist, we have to be anti-racist. It is not enough to just be against nuclear weapons. We have to be a part of this norm building. We have to be a part of this condemnation of nuclear weapons. Nuclear disarmament requires a social movement, requires a paradigm shift in which we all have to participate. So let's keep the information out there going. Let's keep the conversation active. Let's inform ourselves. Please visit us at IPPNW, www.ippnw.org, or ICANN, www.icanw.org, and find out which ways, how to share information and how to get involved, because we definitely need this. This is we are currently alive right now out of mere luck, and our luck is going to run out, and we need to be a part of changing this and to realize that we ourselves are our destiny really is in our own hands. Thank you very much.
Amazing. And so I think Kerrie or Kendra, would you either be?
Hi, everyone. I believe there's a bit of a lag, but I heard my name. And so I can proceed with just a few closing remarks. My heartfelt thanks to everyone who spoke tonight and to everyone who joined us. I think it's an incredibly urgent topic and one that we cannot shine the light on enough. And so I think it's important to remember, whether we're activists or advocates maybe both. We have to ensure we demand that any polluting, risky industries, notably nuclear industries, must be accountable for the cost of their environmental harms. And when we think about environmental harm, we can't just think about the current present day context, but intergenerational harms and the liabilities that we are placing on future generations. When it comes to decision-making in our governments, we need to continue to demand accountable, transparent decision-making processes. There are real access to justice issues when the power differential is such that those who are most affected often have the least voice in decision-making. So again, demanding access to information, a role at the decision-making table, making sure there is opportunities for the members of the public and communities to engage. Those would be some key principles that I think we need to hold across the board, whether we're talking about the oil and gas sector or nuclear or climate action in general. And to remain engaged, remain critical, and to remain connected, which I think motivates us all. And it's been motivating for me to be here today. And thank you incredibly to our organizers and everyone who joined.
Okay, amazing. And if anyone else would like to jump in, I think that we definitely have run out of time. So I'm going to pass the floor to Christian, and thank you all so much again for attending this event.
Yes, thank you all. I think this was a very, great discussion that we, had, and the PowerPoint presentations were amazing, as well as the remarks by all of our speakers. I certainly learned a lot, and the interconnectedness of all these issues are very important. Just before we conclude, I noticed that Esther Yazzie Lewis, you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a very quick question?
I was just gonna talk about but I think a lot of times we're focused on issues which stem out of the social problems, and we don't really, look at the social problems of how people are affected, especially in Native communities where they're going against their own traditional ways of being the guardian for the earth. And I heard Carlos and I've heard others talk about how they, the job is there, and that's exactly what happened when uranium mine came in. But a lot of people were affected by their health, their respiratory system, and the, coal mine that pushed out the Navajo people. And we had the Navajo-Hopi land dispute that forced Indian Navajo people to move out of the reservation. And there were many people that resisted that, and some were forced to leave, and they had to buy homes outside of the reservation, who later lost their homes because they didn't know how to own a home outside of the reservation, and they became homeless, and they turned to alcoholism. Those are some things that I know that are happening within Native American communities that are affected by these corporations, where Native Americans are forced to abandon cultural ways, and they don't have their own stability within their own communities. And I'm just thinking, those are some of the things I think that need to be addressed, not only just, the other part of how solutions and things of that nature can be addressed. And so I just want to say that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Esther, so much for those comments. I would like to thank everyone for joining. We had an amazing, group of experts, youth activists, and of course, amazing, participants here tonight. Thank you so much for, attending this event.